Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best top laners for patch 5.24. This also could be my list for patch 6.1 because as of right now, it doesn't look like there's too many changes to top lane for 6.1. So first up on my list is going to be Wukong. I feel that Wukong is pretty underrated right now. He's really not played too much, but he's got one of the stronger early to mid games for any top laner in the game, which makes him pretty strong at the moment, in my opinion. He also snowballs really hard. If you can get a few kills on Wukong and get going, then he can just start team fighting and he can just start dealing a ton of damage in those team fights because he does scale pretty well with AD on his ultimate, and his ultimate is a really game-changing ability as well. Once you do get ahead as Wukong, then just look to group and look to teamfight because he is one of the stronger teamfighting top laners in the game just due to his ultimate. He's got a really strong level 6 all-in as well, so when you do hit level 6 as Wukong, don't be afraid to go for an all-in. Even if you don't end up doing enough damage, then you can use your W to back out if need be. I would recommend calling your jungler though when you do hit level 6 as Wukong to come for a gank because it's a pretty high chance that you're gonna be able to pick up a kill if your jungler does gank, just due to the amount of CC that you have with your ultimate. And if your jungler has CC, then you should definitely be able to pick up a kill at 6 with Wukong. He also does have a lot of juking potential in his kit, which is just really nice for finding those sneaky engages and for also backing out of a sticky situation. And a few cons to Wukong though is that he's pretty weak if he does fall behind, since he's an all-in champion. You want to be team fighting and reaching the backline as Wukong, and if you don't have your items to either burst down the enemy AD carry or the enemy mid laner, or you don't have the tankiness to survive the front line, then you're not going to be very useful to your team. And he is also weaker against disengage enemy comp, so if the enemy team does lock Janna, then picking Wukong is not the best idea. Next on my list I have Jax. So right now Jax is pretty strong with the Rage Blade item. I've seen so many Jaxes, once the game gets to mid to late game, just end up 1v2ing and 1v3ing because he just does an insane amount of damage, and he can build tank items as well and still do a lot of damage. Like when I'm playing Jax, I'll build maybe 2 or 3 damage items and then I'll just round it out with building some tanks, so you can soak quite a bit of damage in team fights just due to your tank items and due to your ultimate, but you can still deal an immense amount of damage. So if you're just looking for a strong hard carry top laner right now, I would recommend playing Jax. He's a really good duelist and a split pusher as well because he just does so much damage when he does get a few items, and he can duel a lot of the auto attack based champions really easily as well because of his dodge. He's got good mobility too with his Q. He can use that to engage on his target, and he can also use it to ward hop away or just ward hop to a minion if he is in a sticky situation. He does mixed damage too with his W, so it's just really hard to build against the Jax. He's a great split pushing champion too, and he, like I said before, he's a late game monster. One con to Jax though is that he can get kited pretty easily if his Q is on cooldown. Next on my list I have Trundles. So Trundle is a really good pick right now, especially if the enemy team does have a tanky champion on their team. If they lock someone like a Nasus or a Mundo or a Rammus, I would definitely recommend playing Trundle into that. Even if the enemies don't have a tanky champion, he is still a really strong top laner. He's got a great mid to late game because if he can use his ultimate on that tanky target in a mid to late game team fight, he's going to be able to deal a ton of damage while taking like a lot as well, and he can just soak so much damage in team fights if he can get his ultimate off on a tanky target. He's a great split pushing champion too due to his Q dealing the damage to towers, as well as his W giving him the attack speed buff. He's got a really good early game too. He can outduel a lot of the other top laners in the game, and he's got great sustain with his passive too, so it just makes him a great laner. His E, in my opinion, is pretty OP too. It's a 6-second slow, and it gives the knockup right when you use it as well, so if you can place your E in the correct position in a team fight as Trundle, then it can definitely do some good work, and it could be the reason why you win a team fight. One con to Trundle though is that he can get kited pretty easily since he does not have a gap closer. Next on my list I have Mundo. So Mundo is one of the strongest mid to late game champions in the game due to his ultimate. He also is not that bad in the early game anymore. The reason why he wasn't played as much before is because he couldn't really hold his own against a lot of the meta top laners, but now he can actually duel a lot of the meta top laners, and he can also set up ganks really nicely because of the strong slow that he has on his Q. So when you are playing as Mundo, try to call your jungler over for an early game gank, because as long as you can hit one Q Q on the enemy top laner, then you're gonna force them to flash, and then if you want to, you can end up flashing onto them and get another Q and just securing first blood. So make sure that you do take advantage of Mundo's strong CC in the early game. He does have pretty good damage for a tank as well. You don't even need to build a single damage item on Mundo, and you can still do quite a bit of damage. He also is pretty unkillable late game because he's going to have his ultimate running, and he's going to have a lot of tank stats. So if you're just looking for a strong tank top laner, I would definitely recommend playing Mundo, if he isn't banned, of course. A few cons to Mundo though is that he's a pretty easy gank target in the early game since he does not have a gap closer, and he is also countered by Vayne and Grievous Wounds as well as Ignite. So if you are a good Vayne player and the enemies do, or the enemy does lock Mundo, then I would recommend playing Vayne for sure, and make sure that somebody on your team does take Ignite when you are playing against Mundo because it's going to reduce the healing from his ultimate. And to round out the top 5 for this video, I have Malphite. So right now, I feel that Malphite is one of the stronger top laners because he's a really good pick against a lot of the meta champions being played. In the mid lane, we're seeing a lot of Zed, Talon, and Yasuo, and then in the top lane, we're seeing a lot of Trundle, Jax, and Irelia. So Malphite's just a great pick against them since he can build full armor, and his E scales off of armor, so that's really good. His E also reduces the attack speed of the enemy champion if he does hit that on him, so he's just a great pick against those auto attack based champions. He's got one of the stronger engages in the game as well. His ultimate is just a really long range AoE knockup, so if you can hit that off on multiple targets in a team fight and it's mid to late game, you could just end up winning the game for your team with one good ult. He does have pretty good CC as well with his Q and his ultimate, and his damage is quite surprising for a tank. I usually like to go Iceborne Gauntlet on Malphite, and because of the sheen, you can have a really strong level 6 all in, and you can do a lot of damage with just that item. A few cons to Malphite though is that he is a pretty easy gank target in the early game, which is a con to most of these champions on my list for this patch, and he also does have higher mana costs compared to some of the other top laners, so you do have to be careful about using your abilities in the early game. First up on the honorable mentions, I have Tahm Kench. So besides Mundo, Tahm is one of the stronger tank top laners in the game. He's just really annoying to deal with in mid to late game teamfights because he's going to be really tanky, he's going to be really hard to kill because of his thick skin, and he can also deal a load of single target CC with his Q and with his W, so if you're just looking for an overall strong tank top laner, I would recommend playing Tahm. Next on the honorable mentions, I have Renekton. So Renekton does have one of the stronger early games for any top laner in the game. When you are playing him, make sure that you do take advantage of his strong early game. Go for an all-in at level 2 or 3 when you are playing as him because he's really strong if you can get ahead with him, but if you do fall behind or if it does end up going to late game, then he does fall off compared to some of the other top laners. Next up, I have Irelia. So Irelia is a pretty good champion if you know what you're doing on her. She is a little bit harder to play than some of the other top laners, but I've seen some good Irelia players, once she hits level 6, turn like 1v2s when the enemy jungler does come to gank, because she just does so much damage with her ultimate at level 6, and she doesn't even need to build a whole lot of damage items. You can build pretty much full tank on Irelia, and you can still do so much damage in teamfights because she's got a load of AoE damage. So if you're looking for a strong AoE top laner, I would recommend playing her. Next up, I have Quinn. So Quinn is one of the stronger laning top laners in the game just due to the fact that she is ranged and she does synergize really well with the Thunderlord's mastery as well. She also is a very good roamer, so once you do hit level 6 as Quinn, or once you do end up taking the enemy's tower, look to go for some roams as her because she can definitely end up snowballing the game quite hard if she can get her lanes ahead. I wouldn't recommend picking her though if your team is lacking tank or if you are lacking engage because she really doesn't provide any of that at all, but if your team does need some damage, let's say you've got a Rammus jungle and you've got a Braum support, then picking Quinn in that situation would be good, but if you've got someone like an Elise jungle and an Annie support, then I wouldn't recommend picking Quinn since you're not going to have a very strong mid to late game. Next on the honorable mentions, I have Gangplank. So Gangplank is definitely my favorite champion in the game right now. He's not the champion for everyone though because he is harder to play than a lot of the other picks in the game right now. I would say play him if you have experience on him, if you know what you're doing, because the amount of damage that you can get off with Gangplank in mid to late game teamfights is absolutely crazy. But if you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to land your barrels and you can't use those successfully, then he's not a very rewarding champion. So I would say play him if you're experienced on him, but if you haven't played him at all, then I would stick to some of the easier top laners on my list. And to round out the honorable mentions for this video, I have Irelia. So Irelia, like Jack, synergizes really well with the Rage Blade items since her ultimate and her E both scale off of AP. She is one of the stronger mid-game champions as well. Once you do get your Rage Blade and your Trinity Force on Irelia, then look to group with your team, tell your team that you've hit your power spike, and start team fighting, because the amount of damage you can put out in a team fight with mid-game Irelia is pretty crazy. And if you can get a 2-second stun off on the enemy AD carry or the enemy mid laner, then you can just end up bursting them down before they even get out of the stun. So when you do play Irelia, just work around her power spikes and you can be very successful on her. So that is all for the video, guys. If you did enjoy, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I'll see you in my next video.